ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar, my dear friends. This is video number 22 on Viveka Chudamani of Adi Sankaracharya. For him who has experienced supreme bliss, there is not even a whip of sorrow, dukh ganda. He has no bondage, and hence the conditionings of the body, mind, intellect are not there. Naturally, there cannot be any more sorrow for him. That blissful condition of perfect release and joy is indicated in the following verse. Total vigilance, its price, stanza number 320 to 329. So, verse number 320. Drashyam pratitam parvilapayan sanmatreman anandghanam vibhayan samahita संहृन् अंतरं वा कालं नियत्था सति क्रमबन्धे, causing the perceived universe, both external and internal, to vanish, and meditating upon the reality, the bliss embodied, one should pass one's time watchfully for any residual prarabdha. All this can happen only when all the three factors, the vasanas, thoughts, and actions, get eliminated. If after our efforts the vasanas are not totally exhausted, then the balance that remains to trouble us is called destiny, prarabdha karma. This is very powerful. Each one will have to live out his prarabdha. When it is strong, it cannot be ended with self effort. Purushartha, one may try one's best, yet vasanas will assert and insist on inducting their results. They have to be lived through and acted upon. There is no other go. When we thus live through our prarabdha, what must be our strategy to go through it safely, bringing the least wear and tear to our spiritual dimensions, which have been acquired by our sincere and long sadhana? In case an individual, even after years of sadhana, considers this pluralistic phenomenal world as true, he is still a seeker sadhaka and not a perfected one siddha. Then he must go through it all, constantly remembering the Lord, to encourage others and to sustain himself. Let him keep smiling even through the most gruesome experiences. Thus let him spend his time constantly with one hand, let him hold on to his feet, and with the other hand continue working. There is no other way. Insulated with loving contemplation of him and his glory, let him go through life meeting bravely and efficiently all the problems that stand crowding around him. They are all expressions of his residual prarabdha. He cannot escape them, he must live through them. Stanza number 321. Pramado brahmnishtayam ne kartavye kadachan. Pramado mriturityah Bhagwan Brahmanah Sutah. One should never neglect one's steady attunement with Brahma, Bhagwan, Sanat Kumara, the Creator's own son, has called in advertence death itself. The continuous attempt to hold on to Brahmic consciousness, Brahmanishta, let not this constant awareness, this remembrance of the Lord ever fall away from your memory, even for a short time. Then there shall be no forgetfulness, pramada. Remember him constantly. Him does not mean the one who is worshipped in the temples. He is your awareness, this brilliant light of wisdom expressing in all creatures. This life in your bosom, which is life everywhere, is He the Supreme. Let there not be any carelessness and consequent forgetfulness and oversight in the constant practice of contemplation called Brahmanishta. In no circumstance, in no place, at no time should you ever forget this great reality. Constantly remember Him in your own heart, just as you never forget that you are an ego, that you are a man, so continuously and constantly assert that your real nature is the self. The forgetfulness, pramada of the essential divinity in us and our sense of holiness is itself death. In fact, this is real death. Living in the forgetfulness of one's own divinity is spiritual death because thereafter that man can live only as a biped animal. So said Brahmaji's own son Sanat Kumara. Stanza number 322. Ne परमादा अदन अर्थयो न्यू ज्ञानिनः स्वरूपतः ततो मोहस्ततो हन्दिस्ततो बन्धस्ततो व्यथा. No greater danger is there for the man of wisdom than careless about his own real nature. From this comes delusion, thence egoism. This is followed by bondage and then by misery. To a spiritual seeker, there is nothing more tragic than this forgetfulness of his own real nature, Paramada. Inadvertence erupts the volcano of all other sorrows. Forgetting our real nature means non apprehension of the reality. We have already seen how non apprehension of reality can create misapprehensions. For a wise man, there can never be any other tragedy greater than this self forgetfulness, as this can breed a chain of terrible consequences, each replete with insufferable agonies. From self forgetfulness starts delusion, moha. From delusion comes the ego, aham. This ego sense leads to bondage, bandha, and bondage breeds misery, vyatha. When one forgets one's own real nature, the infinite Brahma, one deluged oneself to be the limited ego jiva. This delusion gives birth to the concept I am, aham bhi. Then one starts considering oneself to be one's own body, mind, and intellect. Naturally conditioned thus by the body, mind, intellect, one comes to suffer limitations, bondages, bandha. In order to release oneself from it, one runs after the world of object, emotion, thought. This exertion is sorrow, vyatha. Then desires crop up, and in order to fulfill the desires, we strive. The desiring produces more sorrow and sweating agony. When the desires are fulfilled, there are even more worries. The struggles required to preserve the objects gained permanently with us. But the finite worldly object must definitely perish in time and therefore produce more agony. If our desires are not fulfilled, certainly we are unhappy. If we get them, we certainly want more. This is how the fall comes. For all this, the initial cause is the self forgetfulness, the non apprehension of reality. Therefore, do not forget it. Remember it constantly as your own self. Stanza number 323. Visha abhimukham drishtva vidvansm api vismrtihi vikshepyati dhido drashyosa jarmiv priyam. Finding even a wise man hankering after the sense objects, forgetfulness torments him through the evil propensity of the intellect as a woman torments her doting paramour. The forgetfulness of the divine within is natural to any ignorant, deluded man. But how can a wise man forget his real nature? How is it that we can remember everything else so easily? Why is it so every difficult to remember Bhagavan? How is it that the Lord made us so? The truth is that the Lord never makes you forget your real nature. When the mind is turned outward, Visa Abhi Mukham, then you forget your own divine nature and then you come to play the fool, a limited ego. The Lord has created the sense organs turned outward, and therefore the foolish ones forget the divine presence of the consciousness that shines from behind every sense, act, and thought. They forget because of their complete identifications with their body vestures. The sense organs are turned outwards and they come to gaze on and see only the objects of the world outside and never the consciousness which is behind the sense organs, vitalizing them all always. Some wise, discriminative man wanting to realize that immutable, eternal reality turn their attention away from the OET and realize the infinitude in their own self. This idea of Katkarisi is expressed here by Sankara. Even if a man well versed in the book knowledge, Vidwan, has his attention turned towards the sense objects, he will forget his divine real nature of bliss. When he forgets his real nature, the imperfections of his intellect make him agitated. Vasanas, desires, passions, jealousies, greeds are the ulcerations of the intellect, which then bleed out the pus and blood of sorrows. The poor fellow is led to disaster by the imperfections of his own intellect, just as a paramour tempts and spoils his beloved. A paramour Jara is a secret lover. He uses his partner Priya for his own satisfaction. When one is secretly in love but the beloved is beyond reach, the memory of the sweetheart haunts the Jara and makes him or her miserable. Similarly, you are wedded to the self the Burma, but you have also a private, secret love with the matter equipments and the world of objects. You are constantly fascinated by the innumerable objects of the world. Every one of it deals out more and more disastrous, vitriolic sorrows. Normal sorrows could be borne, and some sympathy from others could be expected. But these are sorrows one cannot even tell another or expect any sympathy from anyone. Hence, once you start acting disloyal to your own divine nature, you become miserable, like the beloved haunted by the memory of the secret lover. The self existent Brahma created the senses with ongoing tendencies, therefore, man beholds the external universe and not the internal self Atma. But some wise man with eyes averted, with his senses turned away from sensual objects, desirous of immortality, sees the Atma within. Kathopanishad, chapter 2, part 4, stanza number 1. Stanza 324. Yathap, Yatha upkrishtam shaivalam aksanmatram ne tishtati avranoti tatha maya pragyam vapi pragmukham. As moss, even if removed, does not stay away for a moment but closes up to cover the water again, so also Maya or nescience covers even a wise man if he ever gets extra word. What had been discussed in the previous verses here with an appropriate example more clearly brought out so that even a dull student may fully grasp the idea. A kind of moss grows in the stagnant waters of neglected ponds. It floats on the surface of the water and spreads out so completely that from a distance the pond appears as a green pasture land. Due to this covering, the waters of the lake will not reflect the blue sky, the passing clouds, or the blazing sun. If you stir the water with your hand, the moss moves away easily, immediately. You can at once see the reflection of the sky in the water therein. But when you remove your hand, the moss again closes in to cover the waters, and the green spread veils the reflection of the infinite sky. Similarly, into our mind, Maya comes and covers our vision of the infinite till it is no more reflected in our bosom. Vasanas or thoughts cover up our experiences of the infinite. When our attention is turned outward, even if a man be very wise, he becomes, if he becomes extrovert, he ceases immediately to experience reality. Therefore, extrovertedness must be annihilated by continuously remembering the Supreme as the effulgent consciousness ever shining in our heart. Stanza number 325. Lakshachyotam chedadi chit chitmi sad बहिर्मुखम सन्निपतेत सततः प्रमादतः परच्युत कले कंदुक सोपान Padsaktau patito yatha tatha. If the mind ever so slightly strays from the ideal and becomes outgoing, then it goes down and down, just like a ball inadvertently dropped on a flight of stairs, bounces down from one step to another. The reason for the fall, even of wise men, Sankara says, is the falling away of their attention from their goal divine. If the attention is diverted even a little, the mind tends to become extravert. If the mind is not turned inward, it will turn outwards. It has nowhere else to go and it cannot keep quiet. If our thoughts turn away from our goal, which is the altar of our total dedication, even a little, the thoughts shall then run towards sense objects. When the thoughts are turned outward stage by stage, we shall soon reach an utter state of sorrow. To drive home the idea, an example is given, as though when a rubber ball slips from the hand inadvertently due to inattentiveness, meaning not deliberately but only accidentally or due to forgetfulness. Whatever be the cause, if the ball falls down on the top of a flight of steps, say from the top of Qutub Minar, it bumps down and we can recover it only on the ground down below. The first drop may be on the first step, the second can be on the 10th, third on the 40th, and next bump perhaps on the 98th. It bumps down in leaps and bounds until at last it reaches the bottom and there knocks about on the walls right and left, forward and backward madly for some time. Only when its momentum is lost will it remain motionless. Stanza number 326. Visesva visechetah sankalpyati tadgunan सम्य संकल्प काम है कामत पुंस है परवर्तनम. When the mind enters the sense objects, it reflects upon their qualities. From mature reflection arises desire. After desiring, a man sets about to gain that thing and thus fulfills his desire. When the mind enters the sense objects, meaning when the mind entertains the sense objects, troubles start. If the objects come to the mind by themselves, nothing untoward happens. If your mind goes to the objects, you are a victim. Note the difference. It is like someone coming to your house, then you are the master. He may be seeking a favor from you, but when you go to another's house, you are a guest and he is the master. Similarly, when the mind enters the objects, it starts imagining their joy contents. When the joy contents in an object have been contemplated upon for long, you come to believe that there is some great joy therein. Therefore, your mind starts seeking that object in order to get at that illusory joy. If the mind is seeking an object, it is always prompted by a desire which can be fulfilled only by its possession and intimate enjoyment. When the illusion of an expected joy is maintained in the mind continuously contemplates upon that object. Then the desire for possessing the object arises. Because of the desire, man starts acting to obtain the desired objects, for according to one's desire will be one's actions. But when the sense objects come to the mind, and if the mind has got the desire or raga for it, it will become the victim. Controlling the mind from running after sense objects is called sama, and controlling the sense organs so that the sense objects may not enter the mind is dhamma. More important than controlling the sense organs, dhamma is the control of the mind, sama. If there is no dhamma, the mind runs after objects and it slowly crystallizes into a desire. And the irrevocable law is as the desire, so the action. If the mind is continuously going towards Narayana, desire for Narayana will increase. Desire for Narayana is the burning aspiration for the reality. Therefore, through Dhamma and Sama, your actions will themselves become a powerful path, a spiritual sadhana. Stanza number 327. ततः स्वरूप विभ्रंशो विभ्रष्ट अस्तु पतत्तयेत् पतितस्य विना नाशं पुनर्निरोह इक्ष्यते. When a man thinks of objects, attachment for them arises. From attachment, desire is born. From desire arises anger. From anger comes delusion. From delusion, loss of memory. From loss of memory, the destruction of discrimination. From destruction of discrimination, he perishes. Gita chapter 2, stanza number 62 63. Stanza number 328. Sankalpam वर्जयेत मात वर्णथस्य कारणम् अपथ्यानि हि वस्तूनि व्याधिग्रस्तो यथोसृजेत्. Through it inadvertence a man may deviate from his real nature. The man who has thus deviated falls. The fallen comes to ruin and is rarely seen to rise again. Therefore, just as the eatables prohibited by the doctor are not taken by the victim of the disease, one should totally give up the habit of reflecting upon the sense objects, which is the root cause for all the mischief. Once fallen from our own essential nature, there is no question of our ever easily understanding the nature of the self. Man, therefore, identified with the body, mind, and intellect, jumps to reach the world of objects and clings on to one object after another. When our real nature is forgotten, there is a deep and precipitous fall. He who has thus fallen goes down to a sad death, a miserable destruction, an empty end. It is the tragic and total destruction of his spiritual personality. Such a fallen individual is rarely found to rise again. Therefore, don't fall is the only logical advice. In order not to fall, renounce idle thinking of the world of objects. Refuse to entertain them. Contemplating upon the objects of pleasure is the cause for all sorrows and tragedies in life and for all difficulties and falls in sadhana. Renounce, reject, and refuse all the idle ramblings of the mind. Cry halt to the wandering mind. When the patient renounces the objects which his doctor has advised him not to eat, he will get cured of his illness. When the objects are in front of us, ordinarily we would love to take them, but in order to come out of the disease, we must reject them. Similarly, let the mind which is now suffering from sensibility reject its tendency to contemplate upon sense objects. Reject and rise above the senses. When the sensuous ideas come positively, let us turn our thoughts to the higher and learn to rise above the cheap sensuousness of our thought. Stanza number 329. अतः परमादान परो अस्ति मृत्यु विवेकिनो ब्रह्मविदः समाधौ समाहित सिद्धि मुपैति सम्यक समाहितात्मा भव सावधान है. Therefore, to the discriminating knower of Brahma, there is no greater death than inadvertence to meditation. But the man who meditates regularly attains complete success. Therefore, carefully meditate upon Brahma in your mind. One should never be careless in one's steadfastness to Brahma. Diligently escape from all forgetfulness. The moment you fall into forgetfulness, you start considering yourself as the body, mind, intellect, equipment, and start seeking through them some ephemeral gains in the field of objects, emotions, thoughts. As you start seeking these, your desires multiply. As the desires sow the thoughts, and as the thoughts sow the action. Actions create more and more vasanas. It will all then end in such a great fall that there will be no more any chance of ever gaining back the lost sense of the self, the Paramatman. Once fallen to such depths, there is no getting up for that seeker. Thus, inadvertence, pramada itself is death, mirtu, forgetfulness of your real nature is death. The living death, so said Sanat Kumara. The rest of the verses piled up arguments to come to the conclusion that indeed forgetfulness of our real nature is death. Marshalling of the above arguments was done only to explain the statement of Sanat Kumara vividly and impress its inevitability on the seeker's understanding. Having given these arguments, Sankara says, therefore there is no death other than forgetfulness. This forgetfulness of our real nature alone is living death. Forgetfulness can come only when one identifies oneself with the sense objects. This is death. Death to all aspirations of any spiritual seeker. To the spiritual seeker who is trying to quieten himself, who has got the spiritual knowledge and who has got the knowledge of the five kosas and the required discriminative power. Forgetfulness is death indeed. Forgetfulness is death because it immediately breeds imaginations and they bring forth desires. Desires give birth to activity. Activity precipitates more and more vasanas which bring more and more thoughts. More the thoughts, more is the activity. In order to exhaust the newfound vasanas, a fresh body has to be taken up. Thus, the individual falls into the whirling wheel of birth and death. Indeed, other than forgetfulness, there is no death. Pramadana prasti mrituhu. When the mind is withdrawn from the object, emotion, thought world, and when it starts contemplating upon Brahma, refuse to initiate any new sankalpas. In the Gita, we are similarly advised, having set the mind upon that, therefore, never initiate any new line of thought. Similarly, here we are told how, when the mind has been withdrawn from its outer wanderings and held in abeyance, samahita, at the chosen point of contemplation on Brahma, one gains the goal truly. Then what are we to do? We must ourselves become quiet without projecting any thoughts. Samhita Atma Bhava. Let us try to withdraw our minds from objects, emotions, and thoughts and contemplate upon our own real nature, the one self in all, withdrawing from the external activities of the physical, mental, and intellectual imaginations. Let us teach ourselves to bring our entire attention to the consciousness within. Contemplate upon the self with great care, meaning slowly, savdhana. You cannot force upon a bud and make it a flower. It must take its own time. A forcibly opened flower will not have real beauty or true fragrance. Never hurry up. Let it take its own time. All that we have to do is to put ourselves on the rails, on the right track, running in the right direction. We shall reach in time our coveted destination. Therefore, very, very carefully and slowly may you gain a state of inner peace, fully abiding in the self. Sri Krishna says, little by little let him attain quietude by the intellect held in a firmness, having made the mind established in the self. Let him not think of anything. In the one, no plurality. Stanza number 330 to 338. जीवतो यस्य केवलम विदेहे स च केवलः यत्किंचित् पश्यतो भेदं भयं ब्रूते यजो श्रुते हि. He who is completely aloof, even while living, is alone really aloof after the dissolution of the body. The Yajurveda declares that there is fear for one who sees even the least bit of distinction. That great master who experiences the state of oneness while living in the physical body becomes himself the one when his body falls off. Even when we see the Master living in the world outside, not only has he already had the experience, but he is continuously experiencing the infinite oneness of the pure self. When his body falls off, he no more experiences the oneness, but he becomes the oneness. With the body, he experiences the state of oneness. With the fall of the body, he becomes the one. This is truth. But anyone recognizing anything other than the self comes to fear. If you recognize plurality, any distinction between you and the world, any single thing or being other than you, there is fear for you. He who, in the experience of Brahma, creates or feels the existence of even the minutest distinction between the subject and object, to him comes fear. Tasya bhayam bhavna thai. Fear is always born of the recognition of the other. You are never afraid of yourself. To protect yourself from your own fear, you build imaginary fortresses around you and yours generally with more money, better position, a large house, etc. Why all these? If anyone asks, our reply must necessarily start with I am afraid. Afraid of what? The answer can be only of something other than myself. So, wherever there is the concept of the other, there is fear, restlessness, agitation, worry, anxiety, each following the other. So, anyone who recognizes or cognizes something other than his own self, the Brahma will be afraid of the other. Stanza number 331. यदा कदा वापि विपश्चिदेशः ब्रह्मणे अन्ते अश्नु मातृभेदं पश्यत् यथा मुष्य भयं तदैव यद्वि अक्षितं भिन्नतया प्रमादात्. Whenever the wise man recognizes even the least difference in the infinite Brahma at once, that which he sees a different through mistake becomes a source of fear to him. The same idea as in the previous verse is being elaborated. Whenever at any time, even for some much as a fleeting moment, you recognize the least difference in the infinite Brahma, fear starts. The very object that you see as other becomes the source of all your fear. Stanza number 332. श्रुत्वी समर्ति अन्यासतनि निषिद्धे दृश्येत्र यह स्वातम ममति करोति उपैति दुखोपरि दुख जातम निषिद्ध कर्ता से मले मलोच्चो यथा. He who identifies himself with the objective universe which has been denied by hundreds of Shrutis, Smritis, and reasonings, suffers one misery after another like a thief, for he indulges in something forbidden. The scriptural lore time and again declares that the objective phenomenal world is an illusion. The Upanishads, Shruti, and the books of traditions, Smriti, advise us in hundreds of passages to withdraw our identification from all delusory misconceptions. Yet, if anyone identifies with the perceived objective world, he comes to live sorrow after sorrow, each one competing in its poignancy with the earlier one. Man is subjected to such misery only because he is disobeying the law of life as discovered and described in the scriptures. Scriptures are the reference books to know the right way of life. He who disobeys them must end in misery. He comes to suffer not only sorrows in the outer world but also the disappointments, dejections, regrets, and agonies of the mind, like one who has defiled himself by an ignoble act, one who has demeaned himself by a self insulting act, not only suffers the chastising whip of the neighbors, but even when he is not kicked by others, he sits in his own chair and kicks himself, regretting, Tat Tat, why did I do it? I should not have done that. Similar self criticisms knife him from all sides. Just as an individual who has committed an ignoble act suffers the physical consequences of the act, as well as his own mental regrets, he who has misunderstood the essence of life and has come to identify with the world of plurality suffers hundreds of sorrows consisting of both the physical pains and the mental agonies. Stanza number 333. सत्याभिसन्ध्यानरतो विमुक्तो महतौ आतम्यते मुपैति नित्यं मिथ्याभिसन्धान रस्तस्तु नश्येद दृष्टं तदेतद् चौरचौर्यो. He who devotes himself to meditation on the reality and is free from nescience attains to the eternal glory of the Atma, but he who dwells on the unreal is destroyed. That this is so is illustrated in the case of one who is not a thief and one who is a thief, constructing pictures of two individuals both devoted to constant reflection, but one on the real and the other on the unreal are given in this in this verse. Truth is that which remains unchanged in all the three periods of time. One who revels in the constant reflection upon truth naturally withdraws his attention from the ever changing phenomenal world comprising the body, mind, intellect, equipments, and their objects, emotions, thoughts world. One who has withdrawn from all his identifications with the equipments is liberated from the persecutions of the world of objects. Such an individual comes to experience the eternal glory of the self. When one gets liberated from the thraldom of the equipments, the ego, perceiver, feeler, thinker, I becomes extinct naturally. Therefore, one thereby reaches the higher climes of truth, where one lives the eternal glory that is the self. On the other hand, he who is reveling in the constant reflection upon the untruth, the equipments and objects comes to destruction. He is pushed into more and more confusions and sorrows, passions and lust together, creating for himself a painful life of tensions, stresses, and strains. An honest man, a chore, and a dishonest cheat chore are the examples for both the above cases. An honest man does honest things and therefore he is happy. The dishonest fellow who has no doubt acquired plenty but by dishonest means is constantly afraid of others. He lives a miserable life in the world. Even though both honest and dishonest men live in the same world or under the same roof, one is happy and the other is miserable because of each one's mental identifications and his particular healthy or unhealthy way of life. Stanza number 334. यति रस अनुसंधि बंध हेतुम विहाय स्वयं में मह मति दृष्टयव तिष्ठेत सुख यदि ननु निष्ठा ब्रह्मणि स्वानुभूत्या हरति ब्रह्म विद्या कार्ये दुखम प्रतीतम. The sadhak should give up dwelling on the unreal which causes bondage and should always fix his thoughts on the Atma as this I myself am. For steadfastness in Brahma, gained through the realization of one's identity with it, gives rise to bliss and thoroughly removes the misery born of nescience which one experiences in the state of ignorance. Constant contemplation upon sense objects asad is the cause for bondage. When lust and passion cloud the mind's vision, they cloud the higher purposes in life and muddy the enduring values of honest living. This drives us to compromise, therefore, one who is striving to live up to the spiritual values, yati, the sadhak should give up the habit of constant reflections upon the unreal, the finite objects and ephemeral experiences. When this is achieved, he starts recognizing his self to be the self present everywhere. The first hand experience of the self wipes away all pangs and pains of life, which are the products of ignorance of the reality. Then he comes to live the peace that passeth all understanding. Stanza number 335. Bahya anusandhi परिवर्ध्य फलम दुर्वासनमेव तत्सतो अधिकाम ज्ञात्वा विवेक ही प्रीहर्ते बाह्यम स्वातम अनुसंधि विदधीत नित्यम. Constant contemplation upon the external objects will only gather up its fruits, with enhancing the evil propensities which grow from bad to worse. Knowing this through discrimination, one should leave the thoughts of external objects and constantly apply oneself to meditation on the self. If you are through constant yearning, continuously in contact with the outer world, the dire results will multiply. What are these natural dire results? The results of contacting the world outside are vasanas, which are to manifest as desires and agitations. The more you turn outward, the more the inner entanglements will increase. When you are turned outward, the agitations vikshepa get multiplied and hence vasanas and desires multiply in leaps and bounds within. Therefore, prompted by your own vasanas, more and more desires arise, which create more and more agitations, and which in their turn prompt more and more activities. This chain reaction continues until at last your entire attention becomes so much engaged with them that you dive into the fields of endless conflict, and the individuality in you gets pounded into an unrecognizable pulp of ugliness. Those who get the discriminative power, Viveka, and the scientific spirit of detachment from the not self, Vairagya, understand how they have earned and why they have reached this chaotic condition in life. Such individuals, having thus understood, leave all the outer context, meaning withdraw their consciousness as much as possible through practice from the body, mind, and intellect, not perceiving the objects, not feeling the emotions, and not contacting the world even as thoughts. In such quiet moments, their entire attention turns inward. So far, the mind had been constantly contacting the world of objects, now turned away from them. The same mind learns to contact Brahma as the seat of pure consciousness within. With the finite mind, no doubt we cannot contact the infinite Brahma, but keep on trying. That attempt at contacting the infinite Brahma with the finite mind itself is Brahmanu Sandhi Brahma Anuchintanam, the attempt of our mind to conceive and comprehend the Spirit. The divine alone can successfully turn it away from the realm of objects, emotions, and thoughts, or else it will be impossible. Divine grace is invoked by our honest and sincere attempts at meditation. Unless you give the mind another point of contact, it cannot leave itself away from its present fields of attention. A divine altar of devotion and reverence is needed at which alone you can surrender your world craving mind in a spirit of utter dedication. Thus, through constant practice, you will come to experience this contact with the higher. An individual who has, with discrimination, thus understood the cause for all his pitfalls and sorrows, must strive to withdraw himself from all his mental entanglements and be released from its usual conditionings. Then he can feel himself ushered into a greater ambit of freedom, a greater fullness of existence. Stanza number 336. Bahye niruddhe man sah prasannata man prasade parmatam darshanam tasmi andirashte bhav bandhan nasho bahir nirodha padvi vimuktai. When the objective world is shut out, the mind becomes quiet, and in the quiet mind arises the vision of the Paramatman. When that is perfectly realized, the chain of births and deaths is broken, hence, the shutting out of the external world is the initial step for reaching liberation. This is an answer to a possible doubt in the minds of the students. The students may feel, why are you insisting upon withdrawal from the outer world? What is wrong with it? Can we not enjoy the good things of the world and perform also our sadhana? Why this negative advice to withdraw from the world? If by deliberately withdrawing from the outer world of objects and by contemplating upon the self we reach Paramatman, then that Paramatman will be caused by sadhana. So, from a finite activity, we must expect infinite results. Absurd. With the finite activity, how can we achieve the infinite? By an action initiated by us, how can we gain the truth? Even if by this effort we reach any truth, it must also be finite, because finite activity can create only finite results. Therefore, O Vedantin, your logic is not acceptable to us. Besides, it is very inconvenient to withdraw, for we don't want to withdraw completely from the sense objects, as they have got an enchanting store of pleasure all of their own. Now the Vedantic teacher answers, this withdrawal is not the direct cause for the realization of the Supreme Infinite. It sets in motion a series of consequences which ultimately lead the seeker to liberation. The earth revolves around the sun and therefore there are the rains. This statement may look illogical, but it is true in its sequence. The earth is going round the sun and therefore the waters of its oceans come under the sunlight. Sunlight has got heat, and with the heat the water evaporates. The evaporated water goes up, and as it goes up it cools. As it gets cooler and cooler it condenses. The condensation increases and hence it becomes more and more dense. The denser drops come down and hence there is rain. Now, supposing the earth was not going round the sun, there would not be any rain, because the portion of the earth facing the sun would have scorched itself to be a desert, and on the other side there would not have been any sunlight at all, and so it would have become an airy land of barren snow. Rain is therefore possible only because of the earth revolving round the sun. Thus, as a series of consequences, the statement becomes true. Here in this verse, the sequence of thought development For the Vedantic assertion is exo- exhaustively enumerated. When the mind is held back from rushing into the world of objects, it becomes calm and serene. Mana prasada. Mind is agitated because of its instinctive habit of gushing into the world of objects. When the mind is constantly contemplating upon the profits not yet gained or profits that it might lose, or the objects and pleasures that can be gained, or the pleasures that might have been, meaning when the mind is constantly agitated in such high frequency, how can it experience any peace? To the extent the mind's wanderings into the sensuous objects are arrested, to that extent the mind becomes calm, prasanna. The reality can be perceived clearly, reflected in such a calm mind, mana prasade. When the mind has become pure, calm, serene, and quiet, when it is not consciously going out into the world outside, it becomes agitationless. Agitationless or thoughtless mind is not a mind. That is the mindless stage, amani bhav. When the mind has thus totally ended, then there is Param Artha Darshanam, the experience darshanam of the supreme Param significance, Artha of the world and our life in it. When the self is well experienced, the sense of limitations experienced through identification with the body, mind, and intellect is ended. As a result of your withdrawal from the vehicles, the concept of outside gets eliminated. As long as the vehicles are there, so long we can say outside and inside. When we have withdrawn from our body, mind, and intellect, there can be no more any outer world to be perceived, outer emotions to be felt, and outer thoughts to be entertained. Therefore, not to allow our attention to go out into the world of objects, but instead to reveal in the subject the infinite, the all pervading, is to be in the state of total liberation. A totally liberated man's experience is that there is nothing other than the Brahma everywhere. Even the world of plurality that we are seeing is nothing but the Brahma play in various forms. Note that the man of perfection will not have the experience of the world of objects, but the difference between an ignorant man and a wise man is that the ignorant man's mind runs after the sense objects with sensuous hunger, while the mind of the wise man never runs after the objects with sense appetite. The objects will come to the mind, but a wise man does not revel in them. Sri Krishna says, I am not in them, they are in me. He is not governed by the objects, but he rules over them as their master. The objects are applicants to the wise man's mind, begging for his special attention. In the ignorant man's case, he runs after the objects and says, Oh, objects, recognize me, I am unhappy without your company. The liberation gained through self withdrawal from the object's emotions, thoughts is permanent and total. It is not temporary or partial. Temporary liberation is the unconscious state experienced under chloroform or in deep sleep. Temporarily, the mind intellect retires, and so objects, emotions, and thoughts do not appear. From the deep sleep or from swooning, when we wake up, the earlier sorrows faithfully reappear. In total liberation, we mukti, never shall they return to persecute us. It is a total transmutation, a total resurrection of the personality. Total liberation is the state in which the mind does not at all go to the sense objects for the gratification of its selfish and sensuous ends. Stanza number 337. कह पंडित है संसद सदी विवेकी ही श्रुति प्रमाण है परमार्थदर्शी जानहन्नी कुयदि सतो अवलम सौपात हेतु शिशुवन मुमुक्षुः where is the man who being learned able to discriminate between the real and the unreal believing the Vedas as authority fixing his gaze upon the Atma the supreme reality and being a seeker after liberation will, like a child, consciously run after the unreal, which will surely cause his fall. Which, which wise man will take to foolish living? No wise man will ever do so, is the import. Pandit means a man of knowledge who has deeply studied the Upanishads, an erudite scholar, an intellectual giant. Not only is he a Pandit, but he has also cultivated his intellect to discriminate between the permanent and the impermanent. Also, he has accepted the logical and scientific statements of the scriptures as the only authority, and he is constantly striving to experience the supreme reality. Paramartha. So, an individual who is an erudite scholar of the scriptures and who has the discriminative intellect and who has convincingly accepted the Upanishads as the only authority, not because of the logic of it, but because of his constant experience of divine reality. Will such an aspiring individual mumukshu ever consciously hold on to the ephemeral things that constitute the fleeting joys of the world? Is there a fool who, having woken up from the dream, will consider that the wife and children of his dream are his lifelong responsibility and take out an insurance policy in the names of his dream wife and dream children? None will do such a foolish thing since dream projections have no existence away from the dream state. Again, such an action as holding on to an unreal thing is not only meaningless but is also the cause for his own downfall. Swapata Hetu. A realized person, an individual of the caliber as explained above, will never hold on to unreal things, will not return to the terrible agonizing experience of identifying again with the equipment. Will a seeker after liberation ever go down and hug the terrible host of sorrows, woo and court this world of shadows? If he does, he will be foolish like a child. As a child, supposing a mother leaving her child alone at home has gone to the neighbor's porch for a chat. The child playfully crawls on its belly, and at that time, if a snake appears near the child without any hesitation, it will crawl forward to catch the snake, not knowing the deadly nature of the snake and not realizing that its one bite would mean death. The child is an example of an utterly ignorant one who, not knowing the venomous nature of objects, goes and coats them until at last they bite and pour their venom into him, which then proves quietly with our quite fatal. Similarly, you and I, in our infinite incompetency to think correctly with our mind and mind crawl forward to hug the sense objects which inject into us the venom of lust, greed, avarice, jealousy, etc. As a result of that venom, we suffer the endless pangs of our life, peace and tranquility die forever in our bosom. The child, while playing, goes directly and catches the candle flame and gets his hand burnt. A wise man, having been burnt once by the world of objects, will he ever, even by mistake, catch the flame? Total liberation is that state having reached which a man is totally withdrawn from the world of objects. Stanza number 338. Dehadi sansi makto ne mukti मुक्तस्य देहादय मीम अत्यभावः सुप्तस्य नो जागरणम न जागृतः स्वपनस्तो भिन्न गुणा आश्रयवात्. There is no liberation for him who is attached to the body, etc. And the liberated man has no identification with his body, etc. The sleeping man is not awake, nor is the waking man asleep, for these two states are contradictory in nature. He who is completely identified with the flesh, who thinks for certain I am the body and caters to it all the time, filling it with some better food, washing it with a better soap, wrapping it with better clothes, etc., cannot gain liberation at all. He is nothing but a mass of flesh. He who is liberated from the entanglements of the body, mind, and intellect, in him such a total and object body identification can never be seen. Those who are identified with the body have no experience of the higher, and those who have experienced the higher are not identified with the body. Thus, they belong to two different worlds of experiences where the one is other cannot be. The waking and dreaming conditions are not available in deep sleep. The deep sleep is not there in the waking or dream conditions. In one state of consciousness, the other two are not present. Similarly, when I am conscious of the body, though through my body I become conscious only of the outer world, and I cannot have the experience of infinite in the state of the Supreme Self while having the experience of the higher in the fourth plane of consciousness. In the state of God consciousness, there cannot be the experience of the other three states of waking, dream, or deep sleep. When I am working through the gross body, I am the waker. When I have withdrawn myself from the gross body and I am functioning through my subtle body, I am the dreamer. When I rest in my causal body, I become the deep sleeper. Thus, these are the three different states forged by the three different identifications, either with the equipments of the gross or the subtle or the causal bodies. When all these three bodies are transcended, then the experience of the infinitude descends upon us. To a man who is thus experiencing the peace of infinitude, how can there be the experience of I am the body, which generates and sprouts the vitriol of burning desires for sense objects? Enjoyments of the sense objects is demanded by the flesh. When one is identified with the flesh, the sense objects can provide some pleasure. But when he is withdrawn not only from the gross body but also from the subtle body, he can never seek, even come to think of the sense object. When withdrawn even from the causal body, meaning when the very causes for the desires are also transcended, then the true experience of the higher dawns. Therefore, the condition of liberation and sensuous passions cannot be expressed at once in one and the same individual at one and the same time. So I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 23 will start with the spiritual growth, the secret stanza number 339 to 348. Thank you for watching this video. Namaskar, my dear friends. Thank you. Namaste.